SaaStr fans, welcome to this week's episode of the SaaStr CRO Confidential podcast. I'm your host, Sam Blond. Two quick programming notes before we jump into this week's episode. The first is we are wrapping up our founder-led sales mini-series on the CRO Confidential podcast this week. And we'll get back to sales and revenue leaders beyond this week. So but we're ending on a high note, as you'll learn momentarily. Second programming note, I'm ecstatic to be attending SaaStr Europa that is coming up here in just a few weeks, June 6 and 7. I'll actually be doing two sessions, one around the 10 hacks that helped Brex scale from 0 to 400 million in revenue, and one session with Parker Conrad, the CEO at Rippling, my former CEO at Zenefits, also close friend and awesome person. Hope to see you all there. Let's continue with today's scheduled programming. We have an incredibly special guest this week, Brendon Cassidy, close friend of mine, my boss. I'm sure you don't like hearing you framed as such, but Brendon was my VP of sales at EchoSign for something like 4+ years. I learned so much from Brendon as a sales leader. Prior to EchoSign, Brendon was the first sales leader at LinkedIn, company y'all have probably heard of before. Post EchoSign, Brendon has done a lot. The first sales leader at TalkDesk, valued now at $10+ billion, and now actually a co-founder. And co-founder of a really exciting business called CoSells. We're going to learn about that in just a moment. But welcome to the pod, Brendon.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thanks for the introduction. And excited to be here.
Perfect. Well, let's start with where we're going to spend much of today, which is talking about founder-led sales from the unique perspective of a current founder that's also one of the most accomplished sales leaders in the world. And interestingly, Brendon, your company is also building a product to help businesses acquire customers. So 3 things that are relevant to this podcast. Number 1, you are a former sales leader and one of the most accomplished sales leaders in the world. 2, you are now a co-founder of a company, and we're talking about founder-led sales. And 3, your business is in this category of acquiring customers. That is sort of the point of this podcast in the first place. Tell us about CoSells.
Yeah, CoSells has been a probably longer 10+ year journey for me. And so I've always had these sort of problems you want to solve, sort of over the course of your career, and you may get a chance to solve them wherever you are or wherever you're working. But, and I know you have some yourself, but you sort of have them in the back of your mind of like, okay, nobody seemed to solve this problem. And then you're like, at some point, that's something that I want to spend time on, I want to solve. And really that's been a pretty big driver for me in my career and the decisions I've made, right? Is like, I have, when I've had conviction about what the problem is, right? And that solving that problem is like incredibly meaningful. I've been right most of the time. And when I didn't have that conviction, I'm not quite as of a track record of success. So I've always tried to follow that sort of credo. And so, CoSells is everything that I've sort of the culmination of everything I kind of worked on for 20 years as a VP of sales, as somebody that's consulted and advised for probably 70+ startups at varying stages of growth, and seeing like, what's the pain, what's the problem, and, what are things that you could do to materially increase your chances to make it. Because 90+% of these companies are not going to make it, right? There's going to be an outcome in which nobody makes money. And so I've really felt like, obviously I was early at LinkedIn, so I saw the early power of like relationships and relationship capital. LinkedIn really sort of shied away from sort of referrals in general, right? It became more about sort of the data and not the sort of connection. And so I always felt like, hey, this is a problem I want to solve. And so CoSells is, helping sort of go to market teams, certainly for companies that are like seed A, B round stage companies. That's certainly where we're focusing right now. Sort of tap into and connect with the people around them that can help them take the most strategic and direct path to their customers, with credibility, with with warmth, and sort of the, in my opinion, and by the way, not everybody agrees with it, and I'm okay. I'm okay being in a place where, not everybody says you're right or agrees with what I have to say, but like the sort of cold sort of outreach playbook, right? Of like, let's just sort of spam the market with sort of quasi-personalized communication is waning in effectiveness, right? You should do it, by the way. It's sort of table stakes. You have to do it on some level, but it's the response rates are going down. Everybody's now been prospected to. And so, there's sort of an alignment between this idea of we should tap into the people that we know and the relationships we have and the people that have influence, and this sort of cold playbook isn't likely going to get you where you want to go. So that's what we're doing. So we have software, we have this sort of Chrome extension, right? That allows you to actually use it in LinkedIn, where you can sort of request an intro from anyone you're connected with. It's super simple, super easy, super clean. And so that's sort of like step one. And then step two is like unlocking the people that actually have the relationships, right? So for people like you and I and Jason and others, like ultimately that's what will determine the winner, is who can sort of unlock that sort of connector experience, or that sort of gatekeeper in a scenario that's a true win-win for both parties. And I think that's a big part of why Reed didn't go down this path 16, 17 years ago, right? Is because the person that owned the relationship that could make the introduction, it was unclear as to what the win was for them. Like, what's the upside? I get the person that wants the intro, but the person that actually has the introduction to offer, what's in it for them. And that's, sort of an obsession for me to sort of figure that out, because it's complex. But if you can figure it out, the reward is really the most meaningful thing I will have done in my career if I can figure it out.
I love it.
Which is to say, I haven't figured it all out yet. So,
well, I think you've identified a problem, and you're in the process of developing a solution and realizing some exciting early results around that.
Yeah.
I coincidentally did a post earlier today that just talked about what types of outbound early stage startups should be leveraging. Yep. So these are startups that aren't yet household names in their target market. And to your point, you referenced earlier, this like blast the universe with cold outbound email sequencing. If you are a little known brand, that's not going to be very effective. As a sales leader, when I was at Brex or Zenefits or even EchoSign, I received countless outbound emails, some of which were from companies that I had heard of and some of which were from companies that I hadn't. The probability of me having some interest in a company that I had heard of was just much greater than having interest in a company that I hadn't. Yep. And to take it a step further, responding to someone that I trusted or that I knew that was making an introduction saying, hey, we love this product, or hey, we love this CEO, you should talk to them because they can really help. I'm replying to that email. I'm not replying to the email from a startup that I've never heard of that has like little web presence and 7 employees on LinkedIn or something like that. But that same company, Brendon, if you...
By the way, doesn't that seem like an obvious thing? What you just said?
It does seem obvious. And so the outcome is, at least the recommendations that I make are around leveraging personal network, but that only scales so far. And so I think that's what you are trying to tackle with CoSell, is not necessarily making this infinitely scalable, but leveraging warm introductions to companies that will ultimately generate more opportunities and more closed businesses outside of this like spray and pray method of outbounding.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a big believer in outreach, right? And I'm a big fan of Manny, who's the founder. And I think it's a great company, and they're going to go public and everyone's going to make lots of money, right? Riley, Divine, and others, right, that we know. It's going to be a great outcome for them, right? And you should do it, irregardless of whether you believe in referrals or not. It's just sort of part of the playbook now, right? It's not really an optional thing. But yeah, I think you should say we should absolutely take our most strategic and put our best foot forward in how we go to market as a company. And that's what I'm trying, that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. I feel like for me, after all these years, that's like, and these, countless startups that are in this situation, right? Of like, nobody knows who we are. Nobody's like clamoring for the solution. Maybe nobody is even acknowledging the problem. What do I do? You've been pitched that company 100 times, and so have I. You probably consulted for some of them in the past, and it's a daunting problem, right? There's not, in a lot of cases, there's not much you or I can do to help them. And that's it. I want to give people sort of a lifeline, to get out of that situation of, which is probably top 3 or 4 reasons why 90 plus out of 100 startups fail. That's one of the biggest reasons why, is you never get to market, or you can't get to market because you're too early and, or you're too late. And I think leveraging relationships and referrals can sort of mitigate a lot of those issues, right? And it, as you know, right, like you're a VC now, so you're thinking about how do you become a $10 billion company? I can tell you now, as a founder for the first time, the last thing we're worried about on a day-to-day basis is like, how are we going to be worth $10 billion, right? You're just thinking about, how do I get from, where we are to like the next stage so that we can live to get to the next stage, right? And so, yeah, that's it. That's what we're trying to do. And I think it's sort of, what I've been talking about, I think, is the market sort of catching up to the reality of that's, you have to do it.
It's awesome.
And then how do you do it becomes the next part.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did specifically to acquire customers, and even more tactically, how we acquired customers through Outbound in the early days at Brex, which I think will be a decent segue to sort of like what you're doing at CoSells to acquire your first set of customers.
Yep.
But taking me back to Brex, when I joined, we hadn't yet launched the product yet. It was in beta. We didn't have much of a website. It said coming soon, and there was no publicly available information online, but we were doing outbound. And we restricted outbound to Pedro and Enrique went through YC. We restricted the outbound to the YC batch that they were in, into prior YC batches also. And we acquired most of their YC batch and dozens of companies from prior YC batches also. And the reason is because like they knew who Pedro and Enrique were. If they were in the batch together, they knew them well. They were excited about the business, strong value prop. And even when you go back to prior batches, those folks go to demo day. They know who the company is. And so we were really successful with outbounding even before we had a website, but we were successful because of these network effects. When we launched, the first campaign that we did, and I've done a post on this, is the champagne campaign, where we sent bottles of Veuve Clicquot along with handwritten notes from Enrique, and we automated that handwritten note process. Just saying, congratulations on your recent fundraise. We're a fellow early stage startup located in the Bay Area, and we're cheering for you. We know how hard it is to build a successful business. And we had something like 75% reply rate to those outbound campaigns and then email follow-up. And then also about a 75% conversion rate to those demos becoming customers. We did a bunch of marketing and brand initiatives. We put billboards all over San Francisco. Let's just go with that example. We owned downtown San Francisco, and we specifically I remember
it was cool when there were billboards. Just kidding.
It was cool when you went from this company when like nobody had heard of you to, I see your billboards everywhere. So at least they had heard of us. But we were very deliberate about reaching out to companies that were headquartered in downtown San Francisco. And if you were headquartered in downtown San Francisco, this was back in the days when everybody went into the office every day.
You knew who Brex was. Yeah.
That's right. And the people that I'm from Kansas City, there are probably some tech companies in Kansas City. We were not outbounding to those folks because they would have no clue who Brex was. And that sort of evolved over time. And again, you just take advantage of these marketing and brand and network tailwinds that you have to increase the probability of success on your outbound.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, you're now doing this for at least the second time, arguably many times over, but you were in a way almost like a co-founder, but certainly like the very first go-to-market advisor at Gong. Yep. You're now doing this at CoSells. Tell us a little bit about the very first campaigns that you put in place. Like, where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gong's where it started for me, right? It's like the first sort of test case in which, that was sort of the approach we took. So I think if you looked at the first 50 customers for Gong, and I'd guess probably 30 were referrals through two VPs of sales, through myself or Amit, maybe a couple investors, right? But like we had networks that were incredibly strong into that space in that market. So we actually didn't need that much other help. We just knew pretty much everything I've been doing for, as you know, 15 years, 10 years or whatever, has been talking to VPs of sales and sales leaders. And so, I have, and Amit as well, right? Amit, who's the founder and CEO of Gong, who's, an incredible CEO and founder, just obviously incredibly impressed with what they've done. But yeah, we were able to, because we had these just massive networks into our target market, probably 30 of our first 50, probably 50 of our first 100 customers were all through sort of our collective network. And that was, those 100 customers set the tone for the next 1,000 customers, right? Because they were through credible sources, right? So there's just a different level of sort of accountability and familiarity with your customer when it's in it's hard to explain, right? But like, obviously if you're cold calling somebody, they don't have any real loyalty to you. But if it comes through an introduction through someone they know and someone they trust, just you're in better hands. You're going to have more rope, right? As your early customers are going to give you more rope, more chances to, prove yourself because you probably haven't figured it all out. So everything you're looking for there, you get through that, and you don't get in sort of the other approaches that you can take. And so that kind of became my sort of credo, which is everything I'm doing. I don't want to. If we're making cold calls, we're doing something wrong, right? If we're blasting cold emails, we're doing something wrong. So yeah, we were able to do that there, and I just said, hey, like, this is pretty transferable. And if the people that have these networks are sort of baked into this equation from the get-go, then it's extraordinarily powerful. And that's kind of what we're doing here, right? So we have this product that allows sort of easy identification, access to, and sort of requesting of intros. And then we have this sort of network of people that are super connected into these markets. If you want to sort of bring them in as sort of call them like paid, we call them premium connectors, paid advisors, whatever you want to call it. But they will open doors and they will represent you and influence for you in the same way I did for Gong 7 years ago. It ain't free, right? And that's the jumping off point for me, right? Is this sort of insistence that sort of like karma is, hey, do me a favor. Okay, I'll do it once. Hey, do me a favor. I'll do it twice. Do me a favor. The third time, everybody's gone, right? There has to be sort of give take. There has to be a win-win. And that's what I believe is the win-win, right? Is to take the people that have the most influence and the deepest inroads and the most credibility and make them a partner, right? And that doesn't just mean give them 1,000 shares or 5,000 shares. It means, put them on payroll, so that's what we do. We pay them $500 a month. They open a certain number of doors for us. And, like wet their beak a little bit, right? As Jason Kalkanis would say. So I think that's his trademark phrase, but that's it. It's not free. And if you insist that it has to be this sort of closed loop karmic, whatever, you're going to come away thinking, wow, we got a couple good intros and then it just stopped. Right. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. Let's go one layer deeper here. This is something that has come up on, I think all three of the founder-led customer acquisition or founder-led sales versions of this podcast that we've done. And what I'm hearing from you is, Brendon, you were an early advisor to Gong. They gave you equity in that business, and you acquired many.
And they paid me.
And they paid you cash.
Yeah.
And you acquired many of their first customers, if not all of their first customers.
I helped acquire. So I don't want to take too much credit. I helped them as, I think I made a material difference in helping establish them as, sort of an early market leader, right, in that space, with customer traction and growth. And on some level, right, you're trying to bring we had customers certainly in the early days of Gong, right, where there was like minimal traction, but maybe a little traction, right? But because we had such strong relationships with a lot of them, right, it really did help us, sort of lengthen out their, path to value. And that my takeaway from that is, hey, if you could replicate having myself and Amit and someone else or other people, that, if you sell to VPs of sales, there's no better way to go to market than leverage 3 or 4 people that know a crap load of VPs of sales. And that's it. It's binary,
And so you at Gong were an advisor through your personal network. You opened doors to many of their future customers.
Yeah.
You're doing the same thing at CoSells. You have a number of advisors that you are paying. It's not one size fits all. Some people are motivated by equity. Others prefer cash, just solve for whatever sort of moves the needle for the person that you think can help your business. And then one thing that I heard as sort of like the next step in this, at least in coordination with continuing to leverage these advisors, is you then start to leverage your customers. So you acquire your first set of customers. Hopefully they're in this category of raving fans. And then you can leverage those customers to generate more customers. Do you, both at CoSells and then historically, do you combine the two? Do you make customers that may be raving fans also advisors that you are compensating, whether it's through equity or cash, to generate more business for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you should, right? And there have been companies that have come and tried to solve that particular problem, right? If you remember, like Influitive with Mark Organ, he was the founder of Eloqua. Remember, that was sort of what they were focused on, which was sort of harnessing existing customers to drive sort of referrals, right, into more business. I think that is absolutely something that you should do. And probably could do out of this. I mean, obviously, when the things that I've been focused on for most of the last 10 years, right? When you talk about companies I've worked for or companies that I've advised for, right? Most of them don't have customers, right? So that's a secondary thing. I do think like one thing that you are great at, right? You're one of the best that's ever been at this. And so was I, or am I, is leveraging, right? Sort of, I call reference selling, right? But leveraging the customers you do have to, that's just baked into like the DNA of how you sell, right? So, you walk the floor at EchoSign, and you heard existing customers being talked about 1,000 times a day. I'd imagine you did that as Zenefits, Brex, because, and we use that as armor and we use it for offense in the sales cycle, right? When we were in a deal and we knew that we had won, when we were in the Facebook deal, right? And we, everything we did was talk about Google. And then we were in Twitter, everything we did was talk about Facebook. So
Brendon, two things that you discussed that stood out to me. The first is talking about, I asked the question, do you pay the customers? Do you give advisor grants or maybe even some form of compensation? Your answer was yes. I emphatically agree. I have seen so many times, and by the way, like maybe on the advisor side where you're giving equity, maybe there's a test here, which is if this person wasn't a customer, would they make for a good advisor? And if the answer is yes, then make them an advisor as a customer and compensate them with that equity. Outside of that, you should have some form of incentive, whether it's like a former referral program or something that, I mean, at least make the ask, but probably incentivize through some form of compensation.
It has to be it's not free, right? And what you're asking for is really, really valuable. And it's a complex transaction, right? It's not just sending an email through outreach, right? There's real relationships here. And, for the people that have the credibility, right? Like if you're a recruitment technology company and you can connect with Kevin Gaither, right? Who was the CRO for ZipRecruiter, right? Who's about as connected into that space as you're going to get. Guess what? Everybody knows who he is more than they know who you are, right? So in reality, like what he's giving to you is critical. He's giving you credibility. It's not just a connection or a referral. He's giving you credibility. And it's not free. And he's, I've literally talked to him exactly about this. And I think his quote was like, hey, my belly's full of karma, I think was his quote. Like, I don't need any more karma. I've got all the karma I need, like if you want my help, like, it's not free. And so, I've probably spent 100 hours talking to people like you and me and others, that have something of tremendous value for people, right? Where they can open doors and they can use their influence at really minimal cost, quite frankly, right? Of like the capital cost, relationship capital cost. And they're like, yeah, like I'm not going to continue to do this if there's nothing involved, right? I might make a couple intros, and that's where like, sort of, hey, let's tap into our investors, VCs, and they will help, but they're not going to continuously help because at some point they'll just say like, yeah, I made some intros for you, bro. Like, the reason I invested in you guys is you figure it out, right? They're not just going to be a volume connector or door opener. And there will be some, right? There are some investors that will do it continuously and repeatedly, but the vast majority are not going to do it. There has to be sort of scalable, continuous incentive. And if you do that, like it's a strategic advantage that your competition likely is not going to be taking advantage of. So
takeaway, and then takeaways, incentivize your customers or make it easy for your customers to be raving fans and refer you additional business. Yep. Continuing down the path of leveraging your existing customers. You'll remember, Brendon, I closed Aetna when we were at EchoSign, and we did a press release with Aetna, or convinced them to do a press release with us around how much paper they were saving by going green and doing electronic signature. And it was, millions of pieces of paper, maybe every month, something like that. And we took that case study and I sent it to United and Cigna and all the Blue Cross Blue Shields, and we won them all. And so, like continuing down this path of leveraging your customers, there's both sort of like a way that you do it through the customer that we've been describing right now, which is sort of like incentivizing referrals. There's also leveraging your existing customers in the way that I just described, which is Aetna wasn't introducing us to United. In fact, like Aetna and United.
Honestly, that's an hour podcast just on sort of reference selling, right? Which, by the way, there's, as a startup, if you're not doing that, then that's like a complete dereliction of duty, right? Hopefully you're telling the truth, right? You're not talking about customers that don't exist, right? Of
course.
Well, you and I have never done that. So, but you have to, even if they don't have that much brand value, you have to still, you're trying to create this perception that like, hey, the train's left the station, right? Like everybody has turned their ships, and you can be on the sort of tip of that spear, right? And realize the benefits before it's obvious, or you can be the last adopter and you can be left behind, right? And obviously it's not that simple or binary, but that's part of what you're doing as a startup, right? Like this has already happened, right? Because that's all you're just trying to accelerate sort of the reality, right? The reality was in 2016, nobody was like stumping around being like, my God, I need a call recording sort of analytics platform. Nobody was like, if I just had that, that would unlock the key. So yeah. And now Gong is what they're, and it's all credit. Just kidding. It's credit to many others, the incredible Amit and Iran and Elon and Jameson Young, who obviously worked for you, worked for us at EchoSign. So they've what they've done is just, honestly, you look at it and you're just like, it's incredible that you were a part of that in the early stages and what it's become. So.
It's awesome. So I hate to use the term playbook because like generally that comes with negative consequences when you try and apply like some playbook that worked for another company that you think might work for your company. That said, at a minimum, we're establishing a bit of a theme here. We've talked with 3 founders of companies that are focused on acquiring their first set of customers. A couple of weeks ago, it was Howard Lerman from Rome. Last week, it was Colin Zima from Omni. Today, Brendon, it's you from CoSells. All 3 of you referenced leveraging advisors and your personal networks to acquire your first set of customers. All 3 of you talked about leveraging existing customers to acquire your next set of customers. And so all 3 of you have very different backgrounds, very different personal networks and advantages, but all 3 of you are applying this same sort of like method. And so for those that are listening, again, there's certainly a trend here between these 3 folks. Continuing along that path, Brendon, I referenced something earlier, which was the champagne campaign where, we sent these bottles of champagne and handwritten notes, and it was super effective. Have you ever tried anything, whether it's with CoSells or Gong or otherwise, that was sort of unconventional, similar to what I just described with that champagne campaign that and the reason I ask, many listeners and many folks on social media that have followed along with posts like that, they find these types of throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks examples really helpful in potentially trying the same thing or coming up with their own ideas. So curious, anything unconventional that comes to mind?
Well, you're talking about sort of a Sendoso kind of flow, right? Which is sort of this champagne or, sort of greeting cards or flowers or whatever, right? Some sort of direct, whatever you want to call it, direct mail sort of drop, right? That's going to drop like something physical to the customer. And actually, so Chris Rudegrap, who's the founder of Sendoso, actually worked for me at TalkDesk back in the day. So I'm certainly a fan of Sendoso and what they've done. I'm actually an advisor for Sendoso as well. Not to steal it back to prior themes, but
hopefully getting some shares for that plug.
Yeah, I think it's you're constantly, if you're in this world, right, you're constantly thinking of sort of new or innovative or disruptive ways to get visibility or sort of, mind share, market share, whatever it is. The reality is there's not that many new ideas, right? As far as we're talking about sort of leveraging relationship capital. Well, guess what? LinkedIn's, been around, right? It's not like it's a new concept to say there's powers and referrals. I remember you and I both, I think, advised for a couple companies in the legal tech space. Right, which was like super traditional, not digital, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we one of our clients that we both worked for was literally they were dropping off donuts and swag in the lobby of these law firms, right? And that was one of the best ways that they could sort of drive sort of engagement and visibility and all that stuff. But yeah, the reality. What's that?
I like that. The reason that I like it.
Part of the reason why was because these people, there's zero response rate to traditional digital sort of outreach and cold calling and all that stuff. It's just hey, dude, you literally have to drop the donuts off in the lobby, right? That's the only way they're going to respond,
I'll tell you why I like these examples. The champagne that we sent, the donuts that you're describing, and I think that's a great example, similar to the champagne, but good sort of ideation and reinforcement at least. Each of those examples are community examples.
Yeah.
When we sent the bottles of champagne to the founders at their offices, they probably opened the champagne and shared it with their team to celebrate the fundraise that we had sent them the bottle for. And everybody probably said, like, who sent us the champagne? It was Brex. Like, everybody then knows who the champagne is from. And
I mean, there's a certain level of class in champagne that's not in donuts, maybe, right? So I like that.
Some people don't drink, right? I think there are plenty of people out there that would prefer the donut, and probably early in the morning, myself included. And so then with the donuts, you are handing out donuts to folks, and it's like, I think it's probably Logical who you're referencing, which is this legal startup. But whether it's Brex or Logical or CoSells, like, who sent us the donuts? And you don't get that. I see a lot of people, or I receive a lot of emails that are, in my opinion, ineffective, that are like, let me buy you a cup of coffee by sending you this Starbucks gift card if you take a call with me.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that is not, that for those that are listening, like, that doesn't work the way that champagne, donuts, the sort of like community examples that Brendon and I have just used here, if you do want to try something similar.
I won't go too deep into it because it's probably an offline conversation, but this idea of like, I've always had this notion of like, what's the angle, right? So if you're going to say, hey, I want to go after Brex, what's the angle, right? And if you don't have an answer to that, then you're nowhere, right? So like, hey, I'm going to go after Sam Blond. Okay, who knows Sam Blond? Or I know that Sam lives in Miami, or I know that, Sam is a Kansas City. There's things about Sam that you can use that will probably get his attention that he doesn't see every day, right? Like, I know that Sam, hey, I followed, like somebody was like, what you did as Echo Sign and then Beyond and then Brex and Zenefits, just, I'm such a huge fan of yours. You're going to respond to that probably, right? And like,
you certainly have to stand out.
So when you reach out, to me, it should be, you should have an angle always. And if you don't have an angle, like you're going to get sort of what you deserve, right? Like, like I know Jason Lemkin, right? I'll give you an angle. Jason Lemkin, if you reach out to him in email and you have a good email that's personalized, he'll respond a lot, right? Make sure like, hey, if you're going to pump my ego up in an email, that your chances are better,
That's right.
Say something, right?
If you write a thoughtful email that is personal and sort of specific to both me and the value, like the problems. Jason talks a lot about solving my number one problem. I'll respond to that email. Or if you're fundraising, like a really good pitch on the fundraise, he will respond to that email.
And so, I mean, there's all sorts of angles you can play. And certainly you have to have some knowledge base and all that stuff, but like, that's not a referral. That's not sort of an AI solution or whatever, right? It's like, there's this base of intellectual capital and things people know about other people. There's something there for that concept for me, right? Call it like intel.co or something, but like, right. Anyways, that's it. Those are other ideas, but like, it's all part of that. Like, what's the angle? Like, are you taking a strategic, thoughtful sort of path to your customer, whether it's an introduction, whether it's an email that's super personalized, right? With information about who the buyer is or problems that the buyer has. That's where we have to go. The other way is just, right. There's an end game to this mindless, rolling up your sleeves and cold calling and not having a plan and sending, a bunch of emails, right? There's like, it ends at zero. That's my belief. It's not a zero now. You should do it. Table stakes. It's not going to hold up that much longer. So, yeah.
You've mentioned a couple times in this podcast, we could do an entire hour-long podcast on just that. I think you and I could probably go for many hours on many different topics, but
we should talk about specific specific
deals. Which I'm sure actually would be valuable for many people, but there are some time constraints. Let's end on something that I imagine is a question that you get asked a lot, that I've been asked a lot. It just sort of like big picture. You have seen a lot in your career as a sales leader, as a founder, as a advisor or consultant. Any just favorite pieces of advice that you like to offer to other founders or sales leaders, given everything that you've experienced?
I would say, it's really simple stuff, right? Like, it's not rocket science, but have an extraordinarily compelling answer to like what problem you're solving, right? What problem are you solving? Can you explain it in one sentence? And if you can't explain it in one sentence, maybe step back and reconsider, or figure out a way to say it in one sentence. The number of startups that, I've seen and encountered in my career, even successful startups, and you're like, hey, what problem are you solving? And they're like, well, we have 1,000 customers, right? Like, well, what's the problem? And, if you don't know what the problem is, how do you know what the solution is? And how's the market going to determine what the solution is? That's extraordinarily common problem. It's right. Which I think something that you're incredible at, is like just distilling it down to like, here's a binary problem and a binary solution, right? A lot of people struggle with that. I would say understanding what, okay, hey, we're a startup. There's no organic, nobody's knocking on our door like it's Salesforce in 1999, right? And you're a single SaaS solution, right? To take an entire category over. It's not obvious, right? And like, think about if it's not, right? What is the cost to solve that problem, right? Because I don't think a lot of founders don't understand that if the market is not obvious, right? And you can't drive sort of organic growth through whatever it is, marketing, LinkedIn, whatever, that you now have a grave problem that's extraordinarily expensive to solve. And I would say the vast majority of founders have no idea what they're signing up for, right? You're talking about, okay, and now I need to hire SDRs. Now, right, in traditional terms, right? Let's just assume, this referral advisor, but like traditionally they don't understand what is the cost to solve that problem. And you're talking about, hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire, train, buy, product and systems and data. And then that's without training any of them, right? And that's a problem. And most people don't understand what that is, or how, that's, again, there's 4 or 5 reasons why 90 out of 100 startups don't make it. That's one of them, right? That you can't figure out, how do we go to market when the market is not going to us? I know that ties into other stuff, but that's one of the things that I would say for most founders: understand what problem you're solving. If you can't answer the question, then you need to take a step back and maybe pause, right? Until you can come up. And then, you've been there before, right? Where you're talking to a founder and you're like, in the back of your mind, you're like, why did you do this? Right? Like, why did you start this company? I don't understand, A
solution with no problem in mind.
Yeah. You just started coding and then you fell sort of into a thing, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then the last one would be from a sales and go-to-market standpoint. There is no one sales methodology that is going to answer, that is going to solve all the things in front of you, right? And so you see some people that are like, I subscribe to this theory, like, BANT or solution selling or spin selling or value selling. And right? In reality, like, if you're going to hire a VP of sales, they're going to need to have be able to incorporate concepts of all those things into their own unique sales methodology for your company. It will not just be something that somebody bought a book at the library about spin selling it's just not going to be that simple. And if you follow those methodologies to a T, you're going to end up in the graveyard. And I won't get into the companies that
have realized that fate. Well, Brendon, let's end on a positive note, which I think is sound advice from a true professional. Thank you for joining us today. It's awesome to see you. For those that listened, thank you for being here. Hope to see you June 6th and 7th, as I referenced earlier, SaaStr Europa. It's going to be a blast, several thousand attendees. I'll certainly be there, and I'm ecstatic to be there. So hope to see you
in London, right?
It's in London.
Cool.
Which the maybe
hey, I might get on a plane for that. So
that would be cool. We'd love to see you there too, Brendon. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.